does brain create consciousness? Yeah. It's actually a centrally important question. Does brain create consciousness? Now, I'm not a philosopher. I'm like so not a philosopher. So if you are a philosopher, leave the room now. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a Buddhist. I committed my life to understanding the mind and, more importantly, changing it. And that's my interest in the nature of mind. I'm not interested in the nature of mind primarily for theoretical reasons. Actually, it is very, very interesting. It's just that it goes in one ear and goes out the next. You know, I read it and think, that's so fantastic. Someone says to me, what did he say? I can't remember. Do you have that? Is it just me? Anyway, I just think, that's so good, that's so good. And someone says, what's so good? I said, it's like really good. It doesn't give you much explanatory power, basically. So yes, so does the brain create consciousness? Now, already you've got these problems even in that construction. So even when we say the nature of mind, or we say consciousness, both of those words are problematic. So if you say the nature of mind, it sounds like the mind is a thing that you've got, like the nature of your knee. You know, so let's look at the knee joint and study it and work out what its nature is. Do you see, actually that's very problematic, to think the nature of mind as like it's a thing that you can find out what kind of thing it is. That's what that suggests, doesn't it? The nature of mind. One of the things that's quite possible about the mind, which is pretty hard to argue against, is that the mind is not a thing. If the mind is not, this is what Schopenhauer thought at least, if the mind is not a thing, then things like number, it can be neither one nor many, because that only applies to things. It can have no contour, because that only applies to things. You can't call it an it. Unfortunately, human language is evolved to talk about things. So how do you talk about things? Things that aren't things. Yeah? So even the idea, just to mystify it a bit more, even the idea that the nature of mind is actually problematic, and Buddhism I don't think talks like that very much, because it reifies mind as if, oh yeah, you've got this body and you've got psychology and you've got your life, but underneath it you've got this mind, yeah, and we can find out what its nature is. It starts to sound a bit like a soul if you think of it like that. Buddhism doesn't believe in a soul, or at least doesn't believe in a soul in the sense it's come to be understood in Western tradition, which is, you know, the real part of you that somehow goes on forever in heaven or hell, or enters in life in another reincarnation. We'll be looking at reincarnation either next week or the week after, I can't remember. Anyway, one of the weeks, because we explored that on the nature of mind and are exploring it. So, you know, if you say, what is the nature of mind, already you're in actually a problem, because you're, without realizing, turning the mind into a thing that you could find out what it is. And then you end up chasing your own tail. You know? And Buddhism doesn't think of the mind as a thing. I won't get the trouble with these little presentations. I think of them as espresso versions of the nature of mind. It's very tempting to go off into more explanation, and that'll take too much time. Anyway, take my word for it. Watch the videos. Come on the retreat. Just put that at the end of everything to make an excuse. So then the other question you could say is, okay, what is the nature of consciousness? That's often how it's put. Is consciousness created by the mind? A while ago, we interviewed the scientist Rupert Sheldrake, who is very, very interesting. He's always accused of being a pseudoscience. It's not pseudoscience at all. He's like, I suppose I'm on camera, he's like a sort of mad scientist. He's like, every time, everything that appears to him, he just thinks, well, you should be able to study that. So for instance, you know, one of his studies is on, do dogs know whether their owners are coming back? You know, that everyone's grown up with this idea, oh, the dog always knows when you're coming home. So Rupert Sheldrake just, you know, he's just thinking, well, you should be able to study that, shouldn't you? You know, you change the time of the vehicle, change the perfume that the owner's wearing if they're wearing it, change their time, change their shoes. Do they know more regularly than they should do that the owner is coming back? It turns out when you do the studies, they do. Yeah, they know much more than they should. That statistically, they do seem to know when you're coming home. Yeah, there seems to be some truth in it. So he's then saying, well, what does that say about mind? Yeah, what does it say about mind? It was interesting when he talked to another scientist about it, and they said, oh, that's just rubbish. And he said, well, let's look at the evidence. And he said, I don't want to see the evidence. And as soon as the scientist says, I don't want to see the evidence, they are no longer a scientist. Yeah? They're sort of a prejudiced of some sort. Yeah, that can be made of that. Anyway, he was saying you can't really talk about consciousness because consciousness suggests something that's conscious. And he was saying one of the things we definitely know about the mind, to use that metaphor. So do you see, even when you start talking about mind, you're actually deep in the world of metaphor without realizing it. And then you take those metaphors literally. But if you talk about consciousness, you're effectively saying that you easily think of it as something that's conscious, that consciousness is a kind of awareness. But we know that most of the mind is not conscious. In fact, it's very mysterious. Like, you know how you can be doing something, and we seem to have some. I was cycling through traffic this morning, and just you can be thinking about stuff, vaguely attending to your journey, and suddenly you'll see something that alerts you, and you're suddenly alert. It's like that you've got a faculty that's open to things at the periphery of your vision, for instance. A lot of your mind basically isn't conscious. The way you have breakfast isn't a conscious activity. You don't think, spoon, where is the spoon? Spoon, where is the bowl? You just do it, don't you, Paul, without actually thinking about it. Whilst you're talking to somebody, whilst you're listening to a podcast, most of your mind isn't conscious, basically. So it's not really quite right to talk about consciousness either. Yeah? So having destroyed both terms, you can't talk about mind, you can't talk about consciousness. But something's going on, isn't it? Something's going on. I mean, so whatever it is by the nature of mind, it's definitely a mystery. It actually is the greatest mystery. In philosophy, it's a big problem. Yeah? How does matter become conscious? Yeah? How does matter create, if that's the right metaphor, consciousness? Yeah, it's the big problem. Like you can do, I don't know whatever they are, X-rays or whatever. They're rather more sophisticated than X-rays, but you can see how neurons fire, and you can put people in CAT scans whilst they're meditating or whatever, and see what parts of the brain are being activated and so on. You can see that in quite a lot of detail, but nobody understands this here, this moment that we're in. Nobody knows how that becomes this. Yeah, how you can look out of a window and have that experience. Yeah, it's unfathomable. After all this time, no one knows how we do that. It's the big problem in philosophy. How does matter create consciousness? Yeah. We really don't know. I don't know. You don't know. Rupert Sheldrake doesn't know. We also interviewed Bernardo Kastrup, who used to work for CERN. And he doesn't know. He's got a very strong theory and a very appealing theory, but he doesn't know. None of us actually know how we do this. So if you want to look for miracles in your life, all you need to do is wake up in the morning and live in this world, which you'd have to, I don't know, it definitely happens. Something's going on. That, interestingly, that's what Buddhism keeps coming back to, is something's going on. I will try and weave, obviously, Buddhism into it as we go on, but Buddhism is trying to say, Buddhism talks in terms of the perceptual situation, that if you open your eyes, you're in a perceptual situation, and that would be a good way of talking about it. And then that perceptual situation seems to you, although you don't know, you can't prove it, you can't know it, it seems to have an external sense, which we roughly call the world, an internal sense, which we roughly call me or I. Yeah? It seems to be bifurcated into those two things. But we know that and one of the things you're trying to learn, I think, in Buddhism, is that mind and world condition each other, even co-create each other. Yeah? Buddhism actually says that mind precedes world. Yeah? And what I want to do in these seminars, if I can, this is really not my gig, I'm better on metaphor. Anyway, I'll try and keep following this statement that mind precedes world. One of the first great statements of Buddhism is experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and made up of mind. Yeah? Experiences are preceded by mind, made up of mind, led by mind, and made up of mind. Now, when you read that in the Dhammapada, which is one of the most important Buddhist texts, you can sort of read over it, think, oh, that sounds... But what does it actually mean that experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and made up of mind? Yeah? So one of the things we need to do immediately is look at this question of to answer that question from a modern point of view. A good place to start would be, does the brain create consciousness? Yeah? Now that is most of our working assumption. Don't know is it your working, hands up? Is that your working assumption? Nobody's working assumption, that's weird. Okay, so people out there on YouTube, it's their working assumption. Most of us, without us quite knowing it, assume that that's what happens, yeah? That your brain is creating consciousness. And the assumption seems to be that the more complex organisms become, so, we've become a more and more complex organism since we were a sperm and an ovum, if we can call ourselves that. Creatures become more and more complex. The assumption is that the more complex they become, the more consciousness can arise. Yeah? That's a general assumption. And that if you injure the mind, you break its networks of connection and complexity, and therefore you have less consciousness. Yeah? It is actually very, very problematic. When we were interviewed Ian McGilchrist on this, he thinks this is the most, of all the explanations for consciousness, he thinks it's the most unlikely, yeah? Not the most likely. He says he doesn't know, but he says he thinks that's the most unlikely. Now, his approach, let's just do watch the conversations, because they're much better than I can do in this short time. But Ian McGilchrist would say, for instance, one of his arguments is, how can something utterly unlike matter arise from matter? Yeah? How can that happen? And if you say that is basically what's happening, it's actually a way of saying it's a miracle. It would be like getting algebra from rhubarb. Yeah? How could algebra arise out of rhubarb? It would have to be a sort of miracle. Yeah? You just can't. It's exactly the same. If you think consciousness arises out of matter, I don't know whether you've ever had an endoscopy or something. I remember having to have, this is a slightly embarrassing moment, but I had to have my bladder looked at, and they showed me the screen. And it was a bit, I thought, I don't recognise it. I don't know, that is so me, that bladder. It's quite shocking. It's just like a pig's bladder. It's just, sorry to be so revealing, but it's just matter. It's just animal matter. So how does that create this? It really is, I think, like getting algebra from rhubarb. His argument is, if you think that matter creates consciousness, you're basically saying that consciousness is a miracle, and that doesn't explain it. It doesn't get you anywhere with it. Yeah. So he thinks that's the most unlikely explanation. Bernardo Kastrup, who is a philosopher and was specialising in AI and used to work at CERN. One of the things he points to is the more and more recent experiments in LSD. I remember having my own experiments with LSD, which weren't so experimental. But one of the things that LSD does is it actually closes down your mind. It doesn't open it up. So it actually closes down parts of your brain. And what you get is more experience, not less. Yeah? So if it's true that more and more complexity creates consciousness, then how do you explain that if you make it less complicated, you get more experience? Yeah? That's a real problem. LSD closes down the brain. It doesn't open it up to more neural pathways. Yeah? He's not very keen on the argument of near-death experiences, which we'll look at later on in the series. He's got, and I might touch on why, but you know, when you listen to Penny Satori talking about her, she did a 5-year study on near-death experiences. It's remarkable, absolutely remarkable. And if you hear even Alexander talk about his near-death experience, where he should be dead, I mean, he went from a 10% chance of recovery to a 2% chance of recovery, with the assumption that you'd never walk or talk again or anything. He's now, you know, jetting around the world giving talks about his near-death experiences. I mean, he should actually be dead. It's like a miracle. Okay, so that's our first assumption, yeah, that consciousness is created by the brain. The technical way of putting it is that consciousness is an epiphenomena of the brain. Yeah, that the brain is, we were built to protect ourselves, to get food, to get shelter, to have sex, to procreate, and we needed a brain to move around. And oh, that's weird. You know, out of that brain pops consciousness, and out of consciousness pops Mozart's symphony and Marilyn Robinson novel. You know, all these things weirdly pop out of this consciousness that was just built to get us to have sex, and you know, and a burger. You know, so that's the first possibility. And as I said, Ian McGilchrist, who knows far more than I do, he says that's the most unlikely explanation. Yeah. The second possibility is: is consciousness transmitted by the brain? Yeah. So instead of the brain creating consciousness as an epiphenomena, as something that happens just in a slightly miraculous way, like algebra from rhubarb, is the brain like a transmitter, like a television? Yeah. So that the consciousness, whatever that is, remember we actually don't know what that is, or mind, whatever that is, because we don't know what it is somehow being beamed from the brain, but it doesn't emanate from the brain. You know that when you smash a television, you haven't, killed Cracker Jack or whatever it was on. It just shows my age. I can't think of any contemporary reference. Netflix. There's this Celine. I keep seeing this name. Is it even Celine? I think she might be a singer. Anyway, no. I just try to grasp for anything that seems vaguely now. But when you let's go back to the television. It's when you just break a television that you've just broken its capacity to transmit. Yeah. So it's possible. Is it possible that the brain transmits consciousness? Still ends up with massive problems because we still don't know what consciousness is, and now we have no idea where it comes from. But perhaps it transmits it. Yeah, that's another possibility. And one of the things we were trying to do in the Nature of Mind project is open us up. First of all, really challenge our materialism. This idea that our lives are really we're just sort of chance creatures in a chaotic universe. The assumption of materialism, of scientific materialism, I don't mean shopping, I mean scientific materialism, is that basically we're a kind of mistake. We're in a chaotic, random universe in which we happen to have popped up. And there's all sorts of ways of trying to manage that, including a multiverse idea that, okay, it's very difficult to explain, so let's have a multiverse. There's a whole chapter, I think, in Ian McGilchrist about why the multiverse argument isn't an argument, but I couldn't even begin to go into that. There's a whole chapter, there was quite a lot on why snakes have mirror neurons as well, but anyway, let's not go there. So the second possibility is that consciousness is transmitted by the brain. One of the interesting, that what we're trying to do in this project is keep on showing people things that don't fit in with our worldview. Near-death experiences don't. Children who have past life memories don't fit in. And when you hear about, and we'll be touching on those in our explorations, when you hear about them, I can't explain it, but I can't explain it away either. I certainly, when I've heard about them, I can't just dismiss them. That seems unscientific, actually, irrational. But I can't explain them either. There's all sorts of things, another thing that, I don't know, just flashed through my mind was how people quite often, even with Alzheimer's, can suddenly, near the end of death, suddenly have this, it all comes back. They suddenly come back. For a very brief period, the whole person comes back. Why does that happen? How can that happen? If their brain has got to a point now where it can't even transmit consciousness. So that's another possibility, that consciousness, and then that you still need a thought. So consciousness, therefore, must be, I don't know, shared. It might be even, as it were, what we originally meant by God, creating the universe. Perhaps that's what consciousness is, I don't know. It's interesting, Ian McGilchrist actually ends up with a kind of God, albeit such an unusual one that it's actually closer to Buddhism than he realizes. And I think the language of God is confusing. I think it's not going to work. Anyway, Ian McGilchrist, and do, as I say, come on the retreat and watch these two new ones where he's talking actually about God and about value. But he thinks that's more likely, but it's still problematic. Can't even remember all the reasons because it's a very big book. He said there's a third option. So you can think the consciousness is created by the brain, or it's transmitted by the brain, a little bit like television transmits whatever it is. What is it? The signal. So it might be transmitting it. The other possibility, he thinks this is the most likely one, is that the brain permits consciousness. So you can either think of the brain, as it were, emitting consciousness, creating it as an epiphenomenon of the brain, or you can think of it transmitting it like a television, or you can think that the brain permits consciousness. Interestingly, Ibn Alexandria, who had this near-death experience and is a neuroscientist, I think he's a neuroscientist, I think he is, or he's a brain surgeon, one of the two, I can't remember. He also thinks that consciousness is permitted by the brain. Like his near-death experience, he was pretty much brain dead. So according to our science, he can't be having any kind of experience. And he was having this incredible experience. Penny Satorian, I'll talk about her next week or the week after. She talks about a patient who had a particular palsy where the hand gets like this, and you can't open. The only way you can open the hand is by surgery on the hand. And he had this near-death experience, this patient 10, and she said to me, is there anything you can do after the near-death experience you couldn't do before? And he said, yes, I can do that. And that's not possible to do that, because the tendons get so tight. You can only surgery can open your hand. So that can't be possible, and yet that is actually what happened. Yeah. So what those do for me, I don't know what that does for you. It opens me to more and more to the mystery of our life, which we're right in the centre of. We couldn't be closer to the mystery of our life, but we miss it by, I don't know, just worrying about our emails and our love life and whether we manage to get a burger or not. Meanwhile, we're in the biggest mystery you could possibly ever hope for. We go and see Top Gun or something to get a bit of excitement, but we're actually already in the most exciting mystery. It's eminently forgettable, by the way, Top Gun, but quite watchable. I was forgetting it with every step home. So anyway, let's not go on about Top Gun. So then, Ian McGilchrist thinks that this idea that the brain permits consciousness is the most likely. He doesn't know, and one of the things I'm keen to emphasise in Nature of Mind is that I don't know and they don't. Nobody knows stuff. We're just opening to stuff. We're just trying to think about life, because that's what humans are here for, is to explore the mystery of being here in the first place. Yeah, and certitude isn't possible in the human condition. Certitude is a sort of ignorance. Yeah, so I'm not interested in answers so much, and I'm very definitely not interested in certitude. I don't think Buddhism is interested in certitude. I'm interested in that sense of, of course I've been thinking like that, and that may not be true. Yeah. So the idea that the brain permits consciousness is basically that the brain might be like a limiter valve. Yeah. So that it allows or not a certain degree of consciousness to flow, as it were, through it, like a limiter valve. Do you see how that would or could help explain why in LSD experiments, where you close down the brain, you get more consciousness? So somehow you're closing down something which is effectively opening the brain to more consciousness going through it. Yeah, that your brain, as it were, is like a limiter valve. Yeah, that it permits or not consciousness. That there is, that we live in consciousness. And again, that starts to sound quite like what the Buddha is saying by experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and made up of mind. That seems to be, and experiences are all we have, and that, the Buddha is saying, is preceded by mind, led by mind, and made up of mind. It's possible that the brain is like a valve that can be closed or opened more and more. Yeah. One of the explorations that we went into is these people with near-death experiences, and of course the brain is massively closed down, even almost brain dead, and yet their consciousness, to call it that, is unimaginably larger, to the degree to which they often change their life and nearly always become more compassionate. So that's his favourite, as it were, explanation, that somehow your brain permits consciousness. And that also helps us understand meditation a bit, because that's how it feels in meditation. In meditation, you don't feel like you're emitting more and more consciousness. You feel like you're opening up to more consciousness. That your job is to open up. Yeah. And I've had experiences, hopefully you have experiences by now in meditation, in which experiences are more conscious. In which I remember when I first came to this class, I couldn't meditate for toffee actually, but when I first came to this class, cycling back to my squat in Brixton, it was my experience had more consciousness, was more alive, there wasn't just more to me, it wasn't just that my inner sense felt more conscious and alive, but my sense of myself in relationship to the world felt more conscious, almost as if the street lamps were slightly conscious, or as if life was a picture of consciousness unfolding. When you go very deep in meditation, it is more like that experientially, isn't it? That you move into a world, and the world seems to be in some kind of communication with you that you'd switched off, that you'd actually damaged almost. Children have it very naturally. They feel a natural kind of animistic sense of the world, and we close it down. When you go very deeper in meditation, particularly on retreat, because retreats are really basically a set of good conditions so that you can meditate more deeply. It's not just that you come out feeling better, calmer, and more relaxed. You sort of do, at least sometimes. But what's more interesting for me, I do want to be better, calmer, and more relaxed, but what's more interesting for me is the world itself, which is a posh word for my experience, seems to be more of the nature of consciousness. Trees, even inanimate things, seem like they have a sort of, as it were, consciousness. I don't mean they, I don't talk to the stones, and I don't have a conversation with a tree, and I certainly don't hug them. They might not like it, remember? Hello, tree, get up, get your hands off me. They might not like it, but something like my consciousness, as it were, whatever that is, because we don't know what it is, feels like it's shining back at me as well. Not as mine, but not as not mine either. Anyway, that's as far as I can go just tonight. So let's just finish with a very short meditation, and let's try and meditate with this sense, this remembered sense. Let's just imagine that consciousness isn't created by the brain. Yeah?